Yorkshire and East Yorkshire. Kofi Smiles at breakfast.
BBC Radio Humberside.
30 years of Grimsby Auditorium and the celebrations are starting here on BBC Radio Humberside. We're going to have more at 8:15. Right now, though, I want to know from you, do you live near a home where lots of people who aren't related live together? Now, they're called houses of multiple occupation. We've been hearing from Councillor Paul Drake Davies, who's actually in charge of housing at Hull City Council. He wants to see less of them in the city.
The problem we have in Hull is a lot of small HMOs, 3 or 4 people in a converted house. We have an over-proliferation of those, especially in my ward, Beverley Newland ward. When those are uncontrolled, unmanaged by unscrupulous landlords, that's where it starts to tear apart the social fabric of streets and communities, and we have a lot of problems there.
We've also heard from Jason Kay. Jason is a whole property developer who specialises in shared accommodation, like HMOs. Now, earlier on, he told us some of his residents of HMOs are.
You get every type of demographic, every type of profession. So we manage hundreds of rooms across Hull, and we've got everything from those who have just been granted asylum to people who own their own businesses, successful business people, doctors, nurses, surgeons, and so on. So every single type of demographic. And people choose to live in shared accommodation for a number of reasons. One, yes, it can be financial, but 2, it can all because they don't like to be alone.
That's Jason Kay, their property developer in Hull. We're going to hear from Julie Ford. Julie Ford is a housing expert. She can shed some light on this situation. Julie, good morning. Welcome to the Breakfast Show. So just before we jump in, can you break it down for us? What exactly is a HMO?
Hi, good morning, Kofi. Thank you for having me on. So basically, an HMO is a house of multiple occupation. So this is where a number of unrelated adults live in a property sharing facilities like the kitchen, bathroom, etc. So they are complete strangers 9 times out of 10, unless you've got a student HMO, which is a completely different kettle of fish. And of course, then you are managing different personalities. Are people going to get on? So sometimes, if not well managed, can be quite chaotic.
So what do residents get when they live in a HMO? Is it as simple as a bed, or there's other things legally that a landlord has to provide for them?
Well, there isn't really any legal requirement in HMOs other than the facilities being provided, such as the amenities and the size of the room. So an HMO can be a room in a shared house that's completely unfurnished, but 9 times out of 10 they are furnished, simply because people who live in HMOs, not everybody, but most people that live in HMOs choose to do so from a financial perspective. So then having to pay out for furniture and everything else is an added cost that they just can't afford. So realistically, an HMO is just a bedroom in a house with a bed, wardrobe, probably a bedside table, and that's the minimum. And then you'd be sharing the kitchen facilities with the other occupants in the house.
So there really is the bare minimum provisions being left for them. But why, if this is the case, why do you think they're becoming so popular then?
I think it's becoming popular simply because of finances. Living in a single let, which is either a flat or a house, is expensive because you have all those other bills on top, your council tax, your gas, your electricity, your TV licence. Whereas with HMOs, the rent that you pay per month includes all of your bills. So for budgeting, it makes life much easier for people that may be living paycheck to paycheck.
Now, it's become one of these things, obviously, as a rise in popularity, people have got thoughts and opinions about them. Can you understand why people don't want them on their street?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Because ultimately, if you have a family home, a 4-bedroom house, and you've got the standard 2.4 family in there, that's going to be a different community feel than 5 separate individual adults living in that property. And again, as we heard from your previous callers from Sylvia and Jason, sometimes, they don't get on, there's arguments, there's screaming, there's shouting, sometimes it gets physical. Nobody wants that on their doorstep. That's not normal. You want to go home and it's nice and peaceful. But it's about how those HMOs are managed. And I think sometimes people just don't take the time to match personalities when they're looking at actually having these HMOs. They just put anybody in really quickly to get the room let, and they don't think of the consequences afterwards.
So let's just flip it though for a second, Julie. If someone living in a HMO feels like they're not getting, suitable accommodation, what options do they have? What can they do?
Well, it depends what they feel is not suitable accommodation. But ultimately, if the HMO doesn't meet the minimum standards set out by the local council and by legislation, then the tenant can make a complaint directly to the local authority. They will then go out, do an inspection and investigate the situation. They'll then send the landlord an improvement notice, or they'll talk to the landlord directly if it's something minimal. The landlord will then have an amount of time to remedy that. If they don't, then the tenant will be entitled to claim what's called a rent repayment order. Now, this is where the tenant can claim up to a maximum of 12 months' worth of rent back for an inadequate property, meeting the regulations for rent repayment orders. But in most severe cases as well, the landlord can face an unlimited fine. And in some cases that have gone through court, I have actually seen some significant amounts that was in the 90,000 as the fine. So sometimes it can be quite fatal for some landlords.
Julie, thank you very much for joining us on the Breakfast Show this morning. Julie Ford there, housing expert, breaking it down and helping us understand HMOs, houses with multiple occupants a little bit better. As I mentioned before, how do you feel about this? Is it something you would want in your street? Is it something you just want to play keep away with? Have you had an experience with them? Have you yourself maybe even lived in a HMO? What was that like? I'd like to hear from you. Share your stories, tell your tales with us here on BBC Radio Humberside in all of the usual ways.
Text 81333.